Welcome to the Close M&A podcast with Gabriel Hill Advisors. I'm your host, Craig Castelli. Today, our guest is Erica Person, founder of Flex Audiology in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. Erica, great to see you again. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you founded Flex Audiology in 2018. Tell us, what was the idea and why did you think it would work?
So I'm going to go backwards a little bit, but I actually didn't know if it would work. I'm one of those people that get told things can't work, and I like to prove them wrong. And so for this concept, this idea was to be more of a fee-for-service model. I kind of felt like that's where the industry's been moving over the last 10, 20 years, but nobody's really jumped on board. And I thought, let me try it, see if it works. And if it didn't, I was no worse off.
So I'll just ask you a question on that quickly, because in different areas of healthcare, fee for service has different meanings. So just tell everybody what you mean when you say fee for service in the context of an audiology practice.
Yeah, so this particular audiology practice primarily focused on hearing aids for treatment. The basic setup of most retail hearing aid practices are going to be you pay one large sum, and that includes your consultation, your fitting, your follow-up care, and that follow-up care can be for 3 to 5 years. The patient never pays anything. Everything after that is, quote, free. And a fee-for-service really seeks to break down each of the components that the patient would go through, and it allows them to make a decision on their own behalf on what pieces and parts that they want to partake in. So okay. The concept, the idea is that it's just more transparent, the patient's more in control, and then they have their payments kind of spread out over time. It's not as painful.
So it's what some people in the industry call the unbundled model, but in reality, it's just moving closer to more of a traditional medical practice where there's itemized fees for every single service that you are opting into or opting out of.
Absolutely. That's perfect.
Great. So by all counts, it's been a successful 7 years. You're on to 2 offices. You're still in business. What's been most critical to your success so far?
I would say the most critical is letting the business evolve. I'm in a different space than my first business. I have young children, got married. I had to really be mindful of my time. And I know that's a stereotype, but as a female, I wanted to be available and available for my children. I wanted to be the primary caregiver, for lack of a better term. And sometimes being a business owner, there's a struggle there. And so I made a clear decision that with this particular business, I wasn't going to let it control me. It wasn't going to be rigid. And so it has evolved with me as I have grown, as my children have grown. So I would say that
makes a lot of sense.
Probably the biggest success is not letting it dictate my life.
Yeah. Well, congrats on pulling that off if you actually have. I feel like that's always a tough balance to achieve. Let's go back a little bit, because you alluded to a prior practice. So in 2016, you sold a very successful practice group in Minnesota. And I assume at least that experience has to have shaped some of your thinking this go around. So you touched on at least one key difference between the prior practice and this one, which is the fee-for-service model. What are some of the similarities between this practice and Here Life, your formal practice, and anything else that really stands out as a big difference besides what you've already touched on?
Yeah, there's very, very little that's similar. I was trying to really think through my head if there was anything similar other than myself. Probably very little that's similar. I've utilized some of the processes and the procedures that I did in the old business. I brought those in because they were solid and they worked really well. But I really looked at this business as being a complete opposite of my old one, because I needed to be able to bring to the market and prove to the market that this model is sustainable for our profession moving forward. So key things I would say that were different is our target market is a lot different. We're looking primarily for patients that are on their second and third devices, not necessarily their first one. That's key. I'm looking for patients that are primarily focused on best practices. They want to go to professionals that follow. If you've heard of Dr. Cliff, everything that he preaches, and if you haven't, you should look him up. We want people that really value the time and expertise of the professional, the audiologist. We're not looking primarily just get them in, sale, move it on, do treatment rates. And then the other thing that our company's a lot different is that instead of focusing just on hearing aid devices for treatment, we're looking at a broader scope of audiology practices, incorporating APD, cochlear implants, tinnitus management. We do some pediatrics, but maybe not as big of a focus as I was before. So those are kind of the bigger differences, and then sliding that into that fee-for-service model has been critical.
Gotcha. I mean, a lot of really comprehensive audiology as opposed to just selling hearing aids, which I'm sure has to be challenging at times because we're all taught that hearing aids are where you make all your money. Yet somehow you've found a way to build a profitable, sustainable business incorporating all these practices.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody focuses on the widget. And I think if we went there, we could look at other industries. Everybody brings up dental. But if you think about even the car industry, I hate to even go there because I don't want to be like, the bad salesperson, the huge used car salesman is what we get sometimes. But, those types of businesses, they make money on the service component. They don't care so much about the cost of the actual device or the car, whatever it's all about the aftercare. And I will say that that's really what helped us get through COVID. And it's helped us get through lean months. Our industry is down almost, I think, 25% this year. And we are doing solid because we have people consistently coming back for services. So we get paid.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Thinking back to when you sold the first practice, because this is an M&A podcast after all, so we have to get into that a little bit. What did you learn through the actual sale process itself? And, if it has shaped your thinking today, how did that influence how you went about starting the new practice?
Yeah, I remember the very first time that you showed me what we were selling. And I remember thinking, wow, I want to buy this practice. But that was part of it. I didn't really truly understand all of the different facets of selling a business. And I think that I was very blessed that I had the pieces that you were kind of looking for to be able to package the business from a sales position. Where that's really helped me is really realized in the initial beginning, I knew I didn't have to do all the things because I wasn't focused on selling. Now that I'm starting to look toward the future, I understand the pieces that I have to put in place. One of which is you have to replace yourself. Much more valuable when we were able to come to the table and the business wasn't me, and the business was about a true business, not a baby, not a child, not my this thing that I didn't want to get rid of. So just being able to objectively step back and say, where are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, and let's look at that, whether that is tying in your expenses, making sure your employees are on board, making sure you've got processes and procedures. That audiology is this is my child. This is something I've had for 20 years. I'm emotionally invested, but when you come to sell it, you can't look at it that way. And so that's been a huge component, at least for me, moving forward. And as the business has evolved, it started to say, okay, what were the pieces that were unbelievably important to me? One of which was clean financials. Super anal about that. Very, I have 2 locations. I'm slowly starting to think about my exit strategy. And so that was the first thing that we're actually implementing this month, is making sure that we are coding things by location to get a better sense of profitability.
So each one can be looked at on its own 2 feet and not have any other intermingling between the two. Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, and then also for whoever's purchasing it to be able to say, okay, what are the expenses that Erica brings to the table? She's gone. What do I have left?
Right, exactly. I mean, it's smart to think that way. I think you're not alone in audiology in treating businesses like they're one more child. We see that in just about every sector, healthcare, non-healthcare. Most business owners own one business. You're extremely unique already in the fact that you've sold one, started another one. You're already thinking about selling it. But that ability to, you call it detach yourself from, and I like to say just think through the eyes of a buyer. Understand clearly what somebody on the other side of the table is going to look at and going to value, and take the emotion out of it. It can be worth a lot more to you than it is to anybody else. You can choose not to sell into a certain point because, they can't, a sale doesn't replace the value that business gives you year in and year out. But when you actually get to that point, understanding the other perspective, taking the emotion off the table really is fundamental to a successful outcome. I'm telling you things you already know, but that's ultimately the reality.
It's such a good point from the standpoint of, because again, especially in our field too, we like to do everything ourselves. And I would say that I was an outlier in the fact that I wanted a broker. And I understand this is your podcast and I'm not here to just, blow smoke, but like
you can blow as much as you want. I'll take it all.
At least for me, I am an emotional person. So being able to have you as that person that I could vent to or give you my concerns, and there are things that I share with you and you're like, good for me to know. Don't you dare tell anybody else this, like having that person in the corner to be able to go back and negotiate. At least for me, that was unbelievably critical. And that is what I have told many of my colleagues who are looking. I'm like, I know you can, quote, do it yourself. I know you can use a manufacturer, but if you can find an independent broker that is out of all of that influence, I'm like, you're going to be far, far superior, better off. So thank you.
Well, you are very welcome. And not to make this too much about me, but honestly, our biggest competition is not another firm. It's the business owner who has that mentality. I can do this on my own. And oftentimes they come to us when they've tried and failed in that pursuit and finally realized, okay, I guess there's more to this than just knowing who might be the buyer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So you talked about some of the things you're doing to prepare for your exit. Before we get into that any further, do you have any major growth ambitions beyond what you've built up to this point?
Yeah.
And it's okay if the answer is no.
I do. And I'm not going to share specifics because I've actually learned not to. I do better if I don't put it into the universe, I find.
All right.
Which is the opposite of what I probably used to do. I feel like before in my old practice, I was limited in my belief lid on what I could accomplish. And I was too caught up in what could go wrong and the fear of what could go wrong. This time around, I'm much more relaxed. I don't know if that's because I'm older, I'm more seasoned, but I'm definitely more open. I have some pretty strong growth ambitions over the next 5 years. I say 5 to 10. And part of that, again, is going to come down to how does my life evolve with my children? Sure. What do I want it to look like? And so I'm staying open to being a business owner for another 10 years, but I'm positioning myself now in case I want to sell in 5.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So part of that's going to be looking at what is the current trend. You actually are on my list to get a hold of anyway. What are the current trends? We don't know what the current trends are going to be in 5 years, but we know that I need to start laying the foundation now if I want to even potentially sell in 5 years. So what does that mean? Multiple locations, a revenue target. Those are the things that I'm starting to investigate on what's current.
Well, if you really can plot it out, it really starts with thinking about the type of exit that you want. So your first go round, you had a sale to a hearing aid manufacturer. They were able to come in, take things over pretty quickly. You'd set the business up so that you had the ability to exit personally pretty quickly. And you did just that and were able to relocate and here you are, right? So those types of deals are fewer and farther between these days. As you may know better than me, the hearing aid manufacturers just don't have the same appetite for acquisition. So you have some opportunities to sell to your staff. You have some opportunities to sell to other larger audiology practices who are going through acquisitions. Private equity may be an opportunity if you get really, really big. We've seen minimal PE in the space, but at least the big one that was in the space a couple years ago had a wildly successful exit when they sold that business. So a lot of different outcomes, and you're going to build the business a little bit differently if you decide any one of those 3 pillars is buyer 1A. But ultimately, without getting too long-winded here, if you have a loyal team and great doctor and staff retention, if you are growing a little bit faster than the industry, I mean, if the industry's down 25%, I still want to see you growing. But you don't have to be growing at crazy double-digit rates. But if you're growing at double the industry rate organically without adding new offices, that's really strong. If you're profitable and kind of hitting profit margin targets, you're likely going to be attractive to any one of those buyer profiles. And then at that point, it's just a function of scale and valuation, who's really best positioned to, write the check that you're looking for, to be blunt about it.
Yeah. I'm very much I'm always in love with having, the provider purchase a location within a reasonable mentality. But I also love the idea of, not necessarily trying to find one provider on staff that would want it all, right? Looking at having independent clinics and what does that look like, which goes down to making sure all the expenses are separated out and that you've got a good solid team in place at each location.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Exactly. I feel like we've gotten into a lot really heavy conversation here about the exit plan. And you're definitely thinking further ahead than the average audiologist, and you'll have a lot of opportunities. I think when you get to that point, whether it's 5 years or 10, plan for 10, be ready in 5. I might steal that line actually and use that as I'm talking with other people on this very topic.
Definitely. I don't know why, I don't know who entrained this in my brain, but I was always told build the business with your exit in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that exits in 20 years, what does that look like? And then build backwards and what do you need to accomplish? Yeah,
I think that's smart. So, I know you don't want to talk too much about your growth plans. Is M&A a part of that at all? Would you acquire another practice? And if so, is that high, mid, or low priority?
I would love to acquire practices. Couple reasons. I can argue it both ways. It's I look for practices, and then if I can't find one that fits within my mold, that's when I tend to open. So I think historically I've done organic opening. It's definitely a lot harder to do than just buying a practice. But there's definitely pros and cons. In my head, my next thought was to purchase, just because I know people are starting to get to that age. However, I also know in my area there is a larger audiology group that is buying up practices. So I also don't want to get into a bidding war with anybody at all. And I've already identified a couple key areas that definitely would need a nice independent practice. So if the occasion arises in the next year, yes. If not, then I'll probably be opening again from scratch because I'm a glutton for punishment.
Hey, do what you know, and clearly it's worked. So I'm not going to ask you about the markets that you have in mind to open, but hopefully there are some other audiology practice owners that are going to listen to this at some point. What would be the most, important 2 or 3 characteristics of a practice to acquire? So in the event that somebody's listening that can check all those boxes, they know that they should give you a call.
I think the biggest thing is that their staff has got to be adaptable. That's the number one thing, because my model is so much different than the traditional. So if I go in and I purchase a practice that is a traditional bundled model, and we start unraveling these things, that can create issues with staff.
Sure.
For sure. So adaptability would be key. How I figure that out, that'll be a later problem for me to figure out. Fundamentally, they'd have to have their finances in order, because I do find that most audiologists are not great at finances. And so they really need to be able to clean that up. And I actually don't have a preference if the previous owner stays on or not. In fact, I think it would be better if they phased out over 90 days. Just with everything that I've seen, so they absolutely cannot be the primary revenue generator in any way, shape, or form. And I say that from the standpoint is I've had so many colleagues that have sold and were forced to stay with the new organization for 3 years, and they're absolutely miserable. And I think in my head, if they're that miserable, can you imagine if the business is probably suffering in some way? And frankly, they probably become a cancer to the rest of the team. Because if they're unhappy, their team's probably unhappy.
Right. A lot of people struggle to hide that and continue to bring the same energy and attitude when they're showing up working for somebody else compared to what they were able to bring when they were the owner themselves. And, it's a challenge plaguing a lot of large organizations. But, your comment about the owner not staying on actually raises two interesting points for me. Number one, if you're going to fundamentally change certain aspects of the business model, that owner is the one who is likely to be the most skeptical and the least adaptable. And so transitioning them out quickly likely helps you get where you're going, a lot more quickly. Two, that's going to be a huge selling point for you competing against other buyers. If there's one thing that we have consistently seen owners willing to, give up valuation in exchange for, it's in exchange for that quick departure, because the premium prices are typically coming with those multi-year employment agreements and a lot of additional strings attached. So if you have a very clean, simple offer to them, a very, clear, visible path out the door into retirement, then, you will definitely stand out in a crowded field of buyers, without doubt.
Good to know.
So last question, give me a piece of advice for a business owner, something they might not have heard somewhere else before.
I would say define what your success is and then reevaluate it every single year. And the second piece to that, and I can get more clear on what that means, at least for me, the second piece of that is to get buy-in from your family and make sure that you're all on the same page. So success to me that first year was literally just getting out of the house. Yep. Being able to pay for childcare. And then as it grew, success changed. Then it became some revenue goals. But if I start looking at really growing exponentially or getting aggressive, that's going to create extra time away from my family, my spouse, and being able to sit down with him on a yearly basis and say, this is what I'm planning on doing. Are we both in? Because both in means I'm gone or I'm working longer hours, and then really maybe checking in every quarter to 6 months, because relationships can change so fast. But checking in and saying, this is what we're doing. Is this working? Are we still on the same page, or do we need to reevaluate? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I have a $10 million, $20 million business if my family is suffering. But that's a choice that I'm making. So define success, check in, make sure everybody's on the same page.
I mean, that second piece is so valuable, and I feel like that doesn't get talked about often enough at all. When you own a business and you have a family, everybody's a part of it, whether they ever step foot through the physical doors of your office or not. And you can't help but bring some of it home with you. You have demands that are not limited to the traditional business hours, and you have demands from children that are not limited to the times outside of business hours. And keeping all that in harmony, I don't know that anybody's ever figured it out perfectly. I certainly haven't, but it's definitely a topic that deserves more airtime in conversations like this.
Yeah.
Well, Erica, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, if that perfect seller is out there, or that audiologist who's inspired by your story and wants to come work for you or just learn more, what's a good way for people to get a hold of you?
Your best way is go to our website, flexaud.com, FLEXAUD.com. All those contact me now. It comes straight to my inbox. So you don't have to remember an email. You just got to remember my business name, right?
Perfect. FlexAUD.com. Well, Erica, thanks a lot for joining me on the Closed M&A podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.